43% of people quit on their goals before February. And if you don't want to be a part of that crazy stat, you need to be aware of why. The title of today's conversation is Why Most People Quit Before a Breakthrough. Hey, it's great to have you back for another conversation as we are talking about why most people quit before a breakthrough. And there are a lot of people, especially as we are further into January, who are believing for a breakthrough. But because of some very key things I'm going to be sharing with you today, they will never see it because they will quit. Again, 43% of people quit on their goals before February. Like literally in a couple of days, by the time you guys see this, there are already going to be 43% of people who already just say forget it for the rest of the year and spend the rest of their year in a tailspin just trying to figure it out, as opposed to staying focused on the goal, being intentional with what they need to do, and actually achieving whatever it is that's on their heart to achieve. And there's some key things that I'm going to be sharing with you today, the three things specifically that are really going to help us become aware so that way we can achieve and see the breakthrough that we are believing for. Because if you're anything like me, there are some things this year where you are simply saying enough is enough. I'm tired of hearing about what could be, what would be, what can be, and all this stuff. I'm ready to take that next step so that way I can do all that I know I've been called to do. And so we need to be aware of some things that can stop us from achieving those things. Okay. And so three things I'm going to be sharing with you, and they're very practical, but I know that they're going to be powerful. So number one, the number one reason why most people quit before a breakthrough is number one, a lack of focus. There's a lack of focus. And this lack of focus shows itself in a bunch of different ways. It shows itself in the way people talk. It shows itself in the way people walk. It shows itself in the way people carry themselves in a whole bunch of different ways. But a lack of focus can truly keep you limited. And this lack of focus does not just happen instantaneously. A lack of focus happens over time. It's developed over time. And there's three key reasons. There's three key contributors to this lack of focus. And that the first one is that there is no boundaries, that the person just does not have boundaries. And when it comes to boundaries, a lot of times we as people, we resist boundaries, we resist guidelines. But what you need to understand is that boundaries actually give you a lot of freedom. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but when you are very clear on how you do things, why you do things, when you do things, what you're doing, when you're clear on these things, you're able to have such a level of peace surrounding just your life, the way in which you wake up and go throughout your day, just because you're very clear on what you do, what you don't do, and just how you live your life. And if you don't have boundaries, you will find yourself all over the place. If you don't have boundaries, you will find yourself settling for things that are below what you've been called to. But you need to put in place boundaries. Practically put, you need to be aware of what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to, just your decision making. Because when you make a decision, any decision, you are always going to say yes to one thing, but that also means you're saying no to another. Vice versa. If you say no to something, you're saying yes to something. Practically, let me just give you a real example. If you decide to operate within your budget one day, you're saying yes to your budget and you're saying no to being broke, right? In another example, if you decide to stop by the McDonald's and eat unhealthy, you're saying yes to the unhealthy food, but you're also saying no to healthy living. There's always a yes and there's always a no when it comes to your decision making. And that's why boundaries and guidelines are so important, because what you don't want to have happen is, especially over time in this first part of the year, where you're saying yes to things that don't serve you, you're saying yes to people that don't help you, you're saying yes to things that aren't advancing you. So much so to the point where you pop up and it's March or February and you're just burnt out or you're just all over the place distracted because there's a lack of focus. So you want to make sure that you have those boundaries in place so you know what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to. Because again, that's what focused living looks like, right? But a lack of focus starts with not having boundaries. Second part, right? Once you don't have boundaries, the second thing that contributes to a lack of focus is not having the appropriate standard. And when it comes to standards, this is something that's very personal to you. When you have a standard, it means that you are your biggest critic as well as your biggest cheerleader. When you have the appropriate standard, that means that anything that has your name on it needs to be presented, needs to be done in a certain way, regardless of title, regardless of position, regardless of space. But if you don't have the appropriate standard for where you want to go, then you're always going to feel like you're in a tailspin. You're always going to feel like you're in a whirlwind just of life, just because you just do whatever's the bare minimum. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who they're only quitting before their breakthrough just because their only focus and their only goal is to do whatever gets them by. And the reality is, in order for you to reach that next level, in order for you to experience your breakthrough, you're going to need to become before you have. You're going to need to basically live at that higher level standard before you even start seeing the higher level results. And that is just a part of the process to the breakthrough. But you have to honor that process to even see the breakthrough. And unfortunately, there are too many people that aren't honoring the process, which is going to result in them quitting before they see the breakthrough. And so the first part of a lack of focus starts with they don't have boundaries. The second part of that is they don't have appropriate standards. And the third part is that they don't have emotional control. You cannot live your life emotional and still expect to win. You cannot be emotional and be controlled by your emotions and actually think that you're going to get ahead. In order for you to truly step into what you've been called to do, there is a level of emotional mastery that is necessary. And don't confuse me with emotional mastery with internalizing, because saying that, you feel sad or you feel anxious or you feel whatever you're feeling and you just internalize it and go do the thing, that's not healthy. That's not what I'm advocating for. What emotional mastery has to do with the management of your emotions, not the internalizing of them. And so if you genuinely want to be focused and you genuinely want to achieve whatever it is that's on your vision board this year, you are going to need to know how to master your emotions. You need to know how to manage them to where okay, if this is a good day where I need to deal with that emotion later, or I need to confront this now, I need to know how I confront certain emotions. I need to know my triggers, all these things. But unfortunately, the people that are going to fall in that 43%, they don't have emotional control, meaning that if they're having a bad day, then everything's bad, meaning that they can't be productive even if they aren't necessarily feeling the best. And the truth is, you are going to need to have some sort of control over your emotions instead of your emotions having control over you. And again, when you allow your emotions to control you, it will result in you losing focus. It will result in you not even being able to be intentional with your life just because you're always just being led by your feelings, which is always just sinking sand. And so when you think about just a lack of focus, the contributing factors to that are a lack of boundaries, number one. Number two, not having appropriate standards. And then number three, not having emotional control. And this lack of focus, again, most of the time shows itself in procrastination. Most of the time, lack of focus shows itself as procrastination. And so what I need you to know is that procrastinating brings burden and being focused positions you for breakthrough. That if you are just waiting around till the right time, waiting around for perfect conditions and all these different types of things that actually do what you need to do, it's just going to be a burden. You're just going to feel stressed out. You're going to feel this weight of life on you, and it's unnecessary. But when you make the decision to be focused, when you make the decision to be intentional and you put in place boundaries and you have a high standard for yourself where you are your biggest critic and your biggest cheerleader and you learn how to manage your emotions, that's when you're going to really start positioning yourself to see breakthrough in your life. And you'll be more likely to see it sooner simply because you've positioned yourself for it. And so that's the reason number one as to why people quit before a breakthrough. The second reason is a lack of execution. A lack of execution, meaning that they don't actually do anything. Like they can have an amazing idea, an amazing goal. They can have every great intention in the world, but there's never any action to match the intention. There's never any real work that accompanies whatever it is that they want to do. And the truth is, action and execution is what separates us. Action and execution is what allows you to actually achieve whatever it is that's in your heart. That it talks about how faith without works is dead, that you can have an amazing idea where you're in faith and you're believing for whatever your breakthrough is. But if it's not attached to any work, if it's not attached to any productivity, then it's just going to fall on hard ground. It's not going to become anything because you're not executing on anything. So, again, your goals and your dreams, they don't just happen on accident. They don't just happen because you think it. Like it starts with thinking, right? It starts there, but it needs to come out of your hands. Whatever it is that's in your mind needs to come out of your hands, and it coming out of your hands looks like execution. And so most people quit before their breakthrough simply because they don't do anything. They aren't having anything come out of their hands. And so most of the reason, again, I'm generalizing, but I believe that this is like the core reason as to why people don't execute. Number one is that they don't know what's at stake. Like they don't know what's at stake. And I'm huge on this because when it comes to our goals and just honestly our overall life and our callings, there are people who need what you've been called to do. There are people whose lives are supposed to be further along so long as you do your part. But if you aren't doing your part and you aren't executing, you are not only robbing yourself of an abundant life, but you're also robbing somebody else of walking in their purpose and their calling. And that to me is like one of the most selfish. I'm not even going to go on into saying what all I think about that. But if you don't truly understand what's at stake when it comes to you becoming the best version of yourself and you operating in your calling and doing what you've been put here on this earth to do, if you don't know what's at stake, then you're not really going to execute at the level that you're supposed to. And again, that is just robbing somebody else. So take you out of it. This is about other people. This is about impacting communities and culture around you. This is about advancing your family, whether it's, your friends, whether it's your family members, whether it's, your kids, whoever it is. You need to know what's at stake. And if you don't, it'll result in a lack of execution, that you'll just kind of do things when you feel like it, to the point earlier about emotional control and boundaries and standards, where you won't be focused and you won't execute because you don't know what's at stake. And that is robbing somebody else. So the reason for a lack of execution, number one, usually stems from just not knowing what's at stake, just an ignorance about what's at stake. And then secondly, another reason why most people don't execute is because they don't have accountability, like real accountability, not like the check-in type of accountability, like the why didn't you get that done? What is on your mind? Like really having somebody else partner with you and help guide you so that way you can really make sure you're hitting your markers, make sure you're hitting your targets day to day, week to week, month to month, so on and so forth. And with a lack of accountability, then you're less likely to really execute, especially if you know you have a report. Like there's a stat, I wish I had it pulled up, but it's like people achieve 40% more when they are handing in accountability reports. Like and again, I'll make sure I put it in the show notes or something, but understand that most people will achieve 40% more when they have weekly accountability reports. And that's important because again, weekly, meaning that like the duration, the rhythm of accountability conversations is every week. Like you are being checked on about what did you do? How did you do it? Did you hit the mark? Yes or no, right? And it's just clear cut, black and white, no gray area about it. But also it's accountability. Like it's just saying, hey, did you do what you set out to do? Simple and plain, right? But then it's a report, meaning that it's really like a breakdown of, okay, what did you do? It wasn't just like, hey, just check it in, like how's progress, like we will have with most of our friends in our conversations. But with a lack of accountability, you're not likely to execute at the level that you should. And for most people, because they lack accountability at the level that they need it, they won't execute. And if you don't execute, then whatever it is that's in your heart and whatever's in your head is just going to be stopped in your hands. And for you to see all that you want to see and achieve what you need to achieve, everything that's in your brain that came from your heart needs to come out of your hands. And that's just the facts of it. So just as a way to avoid this, because again, we're helping build your awareness, you want to make sure that you have the right accountability in place. You want to make sure that you are have a good understanding of just what's at stake. You have a good understanding of just what's at stake when it comes to your goals, your vision, your dream, just your life and your calling. And what I need you to know, if you want to execute well in this new year, is that your level of execution shows how much you believe. If you genuinely believe in your idea, if you genuinely believe in yourself, if you genuinely believe in the life that you can have, your execution and your productivity will reflect it. So I want you to look yourself in the mirror and really be honest with yourself about, am I executing at the level I've been called to? And if you say yes, great, keep it going. But if not, make changes. And so that's the second reason as to why people quit before they see their breakthrough. Number three, the third reason, okay, is that there's a lack of encouragement. There's a lack of encouragement. And this starts with simply not having a proactive attitude. So often people, instead of having a proactive attitude, they have a very passive attitude towards life, towards work, towards family, towards themselves, right? They're very passive. And this is where, their language sounds like it is what it is, or I'm just waiting to see, or I'm waiting on this, I'm waiting on that. But when you truly understand what's at stake and you want to execute at a high level and you really want to walk in your calling and you're focused, you will make things happen. You're going to have a proactive attitude just towards everything that you have going on. Not saying proactive means that you're outpacing God, but it just simply means that you're going to make sure I'm doing all of my part. I'm making sure that all T's are crossed, all I's are dotted, that all check boxes are checked, because I want to make sure I'm in position for my breakthrough. And when people are passive in their attitude, their opportunity is just going to pass them by. When they're passive in their attitude, they're just always going to be thinking about what could be, and they're just going to procrastinate more, which again, ultimately leads to quitting. And that's not where you want to be. And so there's a lack of encouragement because there isn't a proactive attitude. So you need to evaluate your attitude. Is your attitude one that's proactive, or is it passive? And if you genuinely want to see more this year, try to figure out, how do I turn this passive attitude into a proactive one so I can get in position for my breakthrough? And the last reason as to why there's a lack of encouragement is because there aren't the right voices. That a person just does not have the right voices in their life. And this is where you think about people. This is where you think about, twofold. It's where you think about just your internal conversation as well as just the people that you have around you in terms of voices. All right. I want to start with just your self-talk. If you don't have the right self-talk where you have the ability to encourage yourself, it will be a very long and hard year for you. And you need to, and again, it's a skill to develop that you need to develop in order to encourage yourself. It's not easy at first because you're going to need to encourage yourself in the midst of the biggest trouble. You're going to need to encourage yourself in the midst of the hardest situations. But you need to be able to master the conversation you're having with yourself. So that way, regardless of what's going on around you, you always know, I believe in me. I believe in my ability, and I believe that I'm going to overcome this. Whether that's I'm fighting the storm, whether that means I'm staying steady in the storm, whatever situation may be thrown at me, I know that I'm going to make it through this, and I know that I'm going to make it out better. But that comes with working on the way in which you communicate with yourself, working on your self-talk. And practically that looks like just affirming yourself. That looks like, just really being aware of what you're saying to yourself. And that's the first half of just a lack of encouragement. Most people, they have such a poor level of encouragement in terms of how they communicate to themselves, where they are their biggest critic, but that's it. They never even cheer themselves on at all. And they're really hard on themselves. And again, I get it because I'm hard on myself too. But I also want to make sure I'm encouraging myself too. Like, I want to be able to say, like, man, Trev, like, that was really cool that you did that, right? As opposed to I'm only pointing out the negatives. I'm only pointing out, how I'm not this or how I'm not that or how I'm not enough and this, that, and the third. And it just snowballs into this very negative space. And it's just not good. So most people quit just because that conversation with themselves is very negative. And unfortunately, that's also can be paired with they don't have the right voices in their life, where the voices that are around them are telling them, or I should say even questioning why they're pursuing something. Where if you don't have the right voices in terms of the people around you in your life, if you don't have the right voices in your life, you can be limited. If you don't have the right voices in your life, you can be stuck and frustrated because that's all you're hearing from the external world, where you can be saying to yourself, hey, I can do this. I can be this. I can have this. And you can be encouraging yourself in that way. But if you don't have the right voices in your life that challenge you, that hold you accountable, and, also believe in you in the same way you believe in you, then it becomes very hard. And that's where you have to really think about who has your ear. You have to really think about who consistently is speaking to you and what do they believe about you? What do they believe about your pursuits and everything of the sort? And again, these are just things that we want to become aware of. All right. We can talk in later conversations around like what to do and picking the right voices and all that different type of stuff. But when you think about just this next year and making sure that you don't fall into this percentage of 43% of people who quit before February, I can only imagine what the percentage is at the end of February. Like if you want to make sure, you need to be aware of these 3 areas. So that way you're able to be focused and do all that you're setting out to do in this new year. And so when it comes to encouragement, I want to leave you with this thought. Being encouraged is a sign that you have faith. Being encouraged is a sign that you have faith simply because I know that if I start feeling down on me, if I start doubting me and doubting my dream, I know that I've fallen out of faith. But when I'm encouraged, regardless of what's going on around me, that's when I know my faith is still strong. And if my faith is strong, meaning that I'm fully persuaded by what God can do, then I know that anything is possible. And I know that it's always for my good. But it starts with me encouraging myself and having the right voices. Based on our entire conversation today, I want to challenge you and I want you to identify one thing you're going to change to get in position for your breakthrough. Just one thing, whatever it may be. Everything that we covered today, just as a recap, we talked about a lack of focus, which stems from not having boundaries, not having the appropriate standards, and not having emotional control. Number 2, we talked about a lack of execution, meaning that you don't know what's at stake or you don't have accountability. And then number 3, a lack of encouragement, where there isn't a proactive attitude and you don't have the right voices, both internally and externally. So with all of these things that we talked about today, my challenge to you is just identify one area where you want to change so you can get in position for breakthrough. And so as I hope that this conversation was helpful to you, and I'm going to ask you just for 2 favors. The first one, I want you to send this to somebody that you know, love, respect, and want to see win. Secondly, I'm going to ask you to download the free growth guide that is in the description link below. And as always, remember, life gets better when you get better.